Hi, welcome. My name's Sarah. This is Laura. We have literally just got off an amazing webinar that we've just delivered for a bunch of women, and we thought it would be pertinent to re-record it actually because some of the sharing wasn't appropriate to be sharing publicly. So we wanted to re-record it so that we could give you some insight into some of the learning from the webinar and really give you some takeaways so that you can have a think about your own self-development. So the webinar really is focused around the leadership toolkit for ambitious women. And this is something we have been delivering for a number of years. We actually focus some of our training and some of our self-development. We focus on really uncovering what goes on behind successful business leaders and what's behind their thinking, their beliefs, and some of their behaviors. Really looking at what does it take to be a great woman leader in a changing environment and an environment which often changes very rapidly. So we're going to do some interactive stuff. So we're going to ask you some questions and get you to think about some stuff, but really thought-provoking rather than doing some of the polls and things, which is what we've just done on the one we've just delivered. So why do Laura and I why do we deliver stuff that's specifically targeted at women? Well, we have been developing leadership programs and delivering workshops and in-house sort of programs for our clients for a number of years. And we just felt as business women, as business leaders ourselves, we wanted to tailor something that was specifically really targeted at women who want to elevate their performance and their impact. And what are the challenges that women often face when in a leadership position? And often it's things like, we're told it's things like imposter syndrome and self-doubt, feeling the need to be perfect, being able to juggle all the different roles in people's lives. There's lots of common themes come up. So we've actually tailored this webinar and some training programs. We've got one online and we've also got one that we deliver face-to-face to tackle some of those core challenges and core issues. So one of the things we're going to focus on is this concept of how do we deal with managing different roles, and how do we really think about the roles that we play. So we're going to get you to do a quick exercise. So if you've got a pen and paper or just thinking in your head, think about what roles do you play in your current life. So you will probably have lots because you're a woman, but if we could just get you to think about the top three. So if you can put three down, and they can be anything, but put what comes to mind first in your own head. Okay, so for example, myself, my roles might be wife, businesswoman, and it could be daughter. So they could be three of my key roles. And one of the things that we want you to really think about is, what does that role mean to you? And sometimes with roles, we put ourselves in a box and we pop the lid on, and it can feel like we have to conform it to be a certain way. We really want you to think about flipping the lid off the box and pushing the sides down, and think about what could you do if you had free reign and you could go anywhere you wanted to within that role. And the second thing we really want you to think about is, what do your roles mean to you? Because in our experience and some of the training that we do, we delve into this in a bit more detail, but you have a core identity, and your core identity are really, that's the thing that is assigned to you as a person. So for example, what's Sarah Callender's core identity? And for my core identity not to be defined by the roles that I play, that they're defined by my values and my core characteristics, and they are who I am, regardless of any of the roles that I delve into. Those things are core to me, and they pretty much stay the same, regardless of the role that I'm in. Now, so what that means is that if your role changes, and your roles will change and continue to change as you move through your life, that doesn't rock you at your core, because your core identity manages to stay strong. And this is something, it's an absolute, I know when Laura and I learned about this stuff, we were blown away by it, because sometimes what happens is that we allow a role to define who we are, particularly if it becomes a really dominant one in our lives. So a great example of this would be if you have a baby and you have a child, suddenly your role, the hierarchy of your roles might shift, and becoming a mother might jump the queue and become this dominant role. And sometimes what happens is those other roles kind of readjust, but that identity, and we hear this a lot, don't we, Laura? We hear people say that identity then, that role, if you're not careful, becomes your identity. And we hear women say, I can't be anything else other than being a mother, or I feel like that's all I am now and I've lost everything else, or I can't seem to find my way back. So the same thing applies to when you're in a leadership role. Sometimes it can literally be all-encompassing. And particularly if any of you are running your own business, you know how much dedication that takes and how much time you have to give to that role. The watch out is that you don't let that role define who you are, that your identity stays strong, and that role is something that you do when you choose to be in that role, and you want to be purposeful and you want to be present in that role, but you don't let the role become you.
Yeah.
So,
and we've just heard that, haven't we, from that webinar that we've just done. We've heard women say things like, I feel like I'm a mother in every context, like to my kids and to my team at work. And that's where you find a role coming over your identity, versus you having a really strong identity that is authentic. That's kind of, you're going to hear us talk about authenticity through this, that actually you're an authentic version of you regardless of what role you're in, and that identity stays really solid.
Absolutely. And it was interesting that came out loud and clear within the webinar we've just done. One of the other things that we also experience, and this is particularly pertinent, is that sometimes what happens is our key roles start to impact our identity. Yeah. So if something isn't working particularly well in one of your roles, you allow that to define who you are. So say, for example, you feel like things are really difficult at work, you can sometimes allow that to impact your identity, and you then allow that to spread across all of your roles. So say, for example, you're finding something particularly challenging. If you're not careful, then the watch out is that you don't take that and make that mean that you're failing in every area of your life. Because suddenly the challenges are become so big and all-encompassing that you can't actually function in any of the roles. So I think that's something, it's a big watch out. So I'm going to give you a little metaphor. So if you imagine you have 3 glasses, and you imagine that you have one glass full of water and the other 2 are empty, and those glasses represent your 3 roles. So for me was wife, a businesswoman, and a daughter. So, and what we're saying is, don't strive for balance. You hear that phrase a lot, the work-life balance. It is virtually impossible to balance in any given day your work life and your professional life. Sometimes you might get lucky, but it's not about getting balance. It's about putting your energy and your effort and being present when you're in a particular role at any given time. So if you imagine you've just had the weekend and you feel like you're doing really well, and you fill the glass up as a wife, and you've had date night and you've cooked tea for your husband, and you feel like that glass is particularly full. But you look at the other 2 glasses in your other roles, and they're pretty low. So you might think, okay, it's Monday, I need to work really hard this week. So you pour the water out of your wife role into your work role. And suddenly that goes down and the levels in your work role go up, and you think, great. And you work really, really hard for a couple of days. But then suddenly you start to feel like you're not given any time. I haven't seen my mother in a week. I haven't called her. And so suddenly you think, right, I best pour some water into my role as a daughter. And you pour some water into there. All that actually happens is you're transferring the water from one glass to another. If you strive for those glasses to be full all of the time and balanced, you will fail. That will fit you, because you don't have 3 glasses full of water. You only have 1. It's about this acceptance that actually it's enough to be present in the role when I'm in it and to be purposeful. But actually, I know sometimes my energy and my focus has to move from one role to another. Now, it's currently quite difficult for that separation piece, particularly in the environment we're in, where most of us are working from home and there's not as much of a clear definition between the different roles that you're playing. But this is just something to be really mindful of. If you think about a fourth glass, and that fourth glass is full, that's your identity, that's you as a person. Now that glass stays full regardless. And regardless of what's going on in your roles, what we want you to do is to have a full, strong core so that your energy levels stay strong, and that allows you to manage the role stuff. It's really interesting because a lot of people say things like they don't have enough time. Time is you're never going to get more time. You will always fill it with things. So it's about accepting that you're not defined by what you've done. You're not defined by your mistakes, your losses, or your wins. And you're definitely not defined by the people around you or what people say to you. You are defined by you. And if you have a secure core identity, that's the bit that stays strong regardless of the changes that come into your life and impact different areas of your roles.
Yeah, and it's that piece, isn't it, about, we've sort of put on there around like whether you're giving yourself a 10 or a 0, like on certain days in one of your roles. So you might have a bad day at work, but that keep it isolated to the role. That means you've had a bad day at work. It doesn't mean that you're a failure as a person, or you might have had a day where the kids were out of control. That doesn't make you a bad person. That means that you've had a tough day with the kids. Yeah. So it's keeping the challenges, the losses, the failures, however you define them, in the particular role, and looking at that as, you know what, I'll do better tomorrow, and actually I'll focus on being more present, or this is the piece that I'm going to tweak in that role. I'm not going to change who I am at my core, and that's the difference of that separation, isn't it? It's that key line between your roles and your identity and who you are at your core.
Absolutely. So during our webinars and usually and definitely throughout the training and reference points that we make, we like to use women who are really great role models and who are strong leaders and represent a piece of what we're talking about. And Michelle Obama does this in abundance with regards to juggling her different roles, and she's had some big ones, and juggling her roles, but also being authentic and staying true to her identity across those different roles. So you only have to watch her on, how she behaved as the First Lady, how she was with Barack Obama when, he became president. She decided she was still going to play her role, and she carved up a role for herself. And then you look at her on the likes of the Ellen Show, where she's dancing and talking about things really important to her. In her book, Becoming, if you haven't listened to it or read it, then it's a really good read. I'd recommend it. But she talks about juggling her role as a mother and, some of the roles that she thought she wanted and then she decided they weren't good for her. So for example, she trained to be a lawyer for a lot of years and invested a lot of money into it, became a lawyer, and actually found that it wasn't the role for her. And it was such a tough decision to step out of that role and find something new for herself to do. And I think sometimes we've probably all experienced where we've maybe put a lot of effort into becoming something, or in a relationship or in a job role, and actually we found that it's not for you, and then you've needed to make a change to be able to move out of that. A great cross-reference for those big decisions, particularly as a leader, and Laura and I do this a lot, is we cross-reference big decisions against our values, our core values, and what is our gut telling us is the right decision, and cross-checking that stuff is super, super useful, and staying true so people know what they're going to get from you, and being authentic. And like I say, Michelle is a great example of someone who manages to do that.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely. So we're going to look a little bit now at the other side of this, around fear. And we're going to do a really quite a short piece. There is a lot behind this. You know, we often do a couple of days around some of these fears that impact leadership, but we're just going to sort of give you a sneak peek and really help you start thinking about this. So thinking about where you may be operating from fear. The key to operating, kind of what Sarah was talking about, around having that identity that you feel secure in and feeling like you're operating with purpose and that you're present, it's making sure that you recognize when fear maybe starts to creep in and fear starts to drive your behaviors. Because then what happens is you lose control of that being purposeful and you actually start being driven by your emotions and then behaving on the back of those emotions, which often can take you out of sync with potentially your values. You know, if you think about a situation that's maybe gone wrong and you've reacted in a way that you feel like it wasn't you, you know, often we hear from people, well, that's just not me. Like, I just don't do that. But you have done. And often it's because there's a fear somewhere that you've let take control and you've reacted based on that versus actually stopping the fear, recognizing it. You know, you can't necessarily stop that from coming up, but recognizing it and then making a choice around how you respond based on that. So we're going to go into some response stuff in a second. But the first piece we want you to think about is proving and hiding. These are two things that often come up for people when they are operating from a place of fear. Now, you will be predispositioned to do one of the two. When we sort of describe this to you, it might not make immediate sense because these are things that you do on a subconscious level. But if you go away and you sort of think through the whole thought around proving and hiding, you will start to recognize yourself doing this now that we've brought this sort of theory to the forefront. So when you prove, it basically is you go into overdrive of trying to prove something to either ourselves or to other people. And that can be in any of those roles that Sarah talked about. You know, it could be at work, it could be at home, it could be as a parent, whatever the situation, it's that you're trying to prove something. Now, proving is quite loud. You can hear it and you can feel it. And it can feel quite frantic and it can feel sometimes quite argumentative. So you will notice when you're doing it moving forwards. If you are more of a person who can't help but jump in and put their point across, you're very proactive, you like to drive action, the likelihood is that you will drop into proving probably more than hiding. With hiding, if that's where you default to, now we appreciate you will do both, but you will have a dominant. When hiding, when a fear comes up, you will typically you will hide from that fear. So what that can look like is you might diminish your voice. So if you're in a situation, you might just not say anything. You might actually stop yourself from going for something you really want because there's a fear there that you might not get it. So you actually think it's better just not to try. Now that hiding, if you're more of a reflective, quieter, slower paced individual, the likelihood is you may do more of that because often that hiding can drive what we call like that overthinking loop, that you get stuck in the overthinking and it actually prevents you from doing something. Now, neither of these are better than the other. They both have their own challenges. So we're just going to put that out there because often people think, oh, I feel like I'm this, but I'd rather be this. Both Sarah and myself, we tend to default more into the proving space. But when we've done this with clients, there is a real mix between the two. So just to give you an example to put this into practice. Now, there are 7 core fears. I did some training with a guy called Chris McAllister, and he has written a book on this, and he actually has more, but we've taken them and applied them to the leadership work that we do, and we've distilled them down into actually 7. And the thought process behind this is that you have a core fear that is across all of the contexts of your life. So the roles that Sarah described before, it's cross-role. Now, when we first were exposed to this, we weren't bought in that there was just one fear because it feels like you've got lots of things. There is a fear that's underneath all of it. Now, what it doesn't mean is that you won't have anxieties around other things, and anxieties brought on by experiences that you've had, but there is still a core fear underneath. So looking at one of these, which is poor performance, The fear there is I don't have what it takes. Now, what that can look like improving or hiding. If you're improving with poor performance, it can manifest as you being an aggressive taskmaster, whether that's of yourself, of I don't feel like I'm good enough, is that really the best I can do? I've got to push harder. Or as a manager or a leader with your team, it can almost be that you set such high standards that they're unrealistic for other people to hit. And you can be a real driver of that, but actually what it does is sometimes sabotages the work of others. The hiding piece with poor performance can be, I can't risk failing in front of others. Therefore, I'm either just not going to give this a go, or I'm going to give it a go, but really quietly, and I'm not going to share it with anyone. Or when helping others, you might avoid helping people or asking questions in case you don't have an answer. So we hear this a lot with leadership teams of people saying, well, I got a sense that maybe they're struggling with that, but I don't want to ask them because what if they say they are struggling and then I don't know how to help them? And it's okay not to know, but if you have a fear of that, I don't have what it takes, that drives everything. Now, be careful not to take that fear and assume that that's yours, because there are 7. And like we said at the start of this, there is some real deep-rooted stuff that we can take you through. For me personally, mine is driven by upbringing. It's driven by the fact that I'm an only child. It's driven by the fact that I'm a high achiever. It's actually not this one. So you resist the urge to pin down your fear. That's not the point of what we're giving you. What we want you to think about is, where do you prove and hide? And how can you notice over the next couple of months where that happens? And we would encourage you to get a notebook, get something and write it down. Notice the times where you're proving and hiding. Notice where you're more predispositioned, and then look at what the trigger points are, because you will have them. And that's the point in helping you to be able to manage this better. Because, so for me personally, I have a trigger point around if I feel like somebody's questioning my credibility, if I feel like they're questioning whether I did a great job at something. Those are trigger points for me where my fear can kick in and it can cause me to have an emotional response. So they're pieces that I know that I need to proceed with caution. Imagine there's a big stop sign. That's what you're looking for. So have a little think about your leadership role. Do you feel like you do more of the proving or the hiding? A useful way to think about this is maybe think about a situation that hasn't gone how you'd hoped it to, where you've maybe reacted in the wrong way. That piece that we talked about before around, I reacted and that didn't feel like me. Maybe it triggered stress or anxiety. If you do more of the hiding piece, that you found yourself falling into an overthinking loop. How did you respond? Do you think that you were proving or you were hiding? So once you've noted that down, like I say, it's useful to keep an eye on that over the next couple of months, because you will start to notice a pattern. A little piece of insight around this: your fear is also your biggest, it's often the thing that drives you. So if you can understand your fear and use it for good, that's where to use it. And what we're not saying is that there will ever be instances where it is not appropriate to maybe prove something, or appropriate to potentially hold back and not say something. It's making sure that you're doing this from a place of purpose. Sheryl Sandberg has a great TED Talk. If you haven't watched it, she does a great TED Talk on women in leadership. And she has this saying about, are you taking your seat at the table? She talks about a story essentially of her at Facebook, and she had some young women come and sit in a meeting, and they sat on the sidelines. They didn't come to the table, and she actually invited them and said, listen, please come and sit at the table. We see this so much in the work that we do of women who are invited to sit at the table, and metaphorically, they actually sit at the table, but they don't sit at the table from a presence standpoint. They sit there and they don't say anything, or their body language is reserved, and they're not sitting at the table and contributing purposefully. And often that's driven by the fear piece that actually, am I going to say the wrong thing? Or on the other end of the scale, sometimes you have and this happens with women, where it's the interesting dynamic between women and men and how they put their point across and the misconceptions that can come across. Sometimes as a woman, if you're at a board table with a lot of men, you either may say nothing, or you feel like you have to prove something. I'm the only woman here, I'm going to prove that I'm valuable. And you end up doing that whole thing of speaking, but with no purpose. So there's a lot of noise, but actually it's not considered and purposeful. So it's really thinking about, A, are you sitting at the table? And B, are you contributing with value when you do that? Because there's as much value when you say nothing sometimes, isn't there, as to when you say something?
For sure. I think just a little point to emphasize is sometimes when you're transitioning from management into a leadership role, there can be the fear can kick in. So you might be really confident in a management role, and you're sitting at the table and you're driving the conversation and you feel really comfortable. Yeah. If you then get invited to sit at a senior management level and with a leadership team, we found in some of our workshops that we've done and the programs we've led that it's that transition piece, and people feel like they end up hiding or proven, but often hiding, because that step in seeing themselves as having a voice in a leadership level is quite a big transition. And if you don't have people around you to support you and encourage you to speak, or good facilitators or chairs, then actually sometimes you can find yourself sitting at the sidelines and not speaking at all. And that only perpetuates you to think that you've got nothing to say and you're not contributing, which then spins you into a bigger loop and potentially means you won't speak at the next one. So it's really about, as Laura said, spotting it and then being more conscious of what you do when you go into those situations so that you can be more purposeful.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of follow on from this, we want you to think about your response. So what we want you to think about is responding purposefully versus reacting fearfully. And this equation is a great one. If you haven't read Urban Meyer's book, Above the Line, this is a piece from that. And he talks about E plus R equals O. The event plus the response equals the outcome. And that's why we wanted to bring this proven and hiding fear piece to your conscious, because often fear's driving you, you react, and you react fearfully. And often that's emotional. You have an emotional reaction to something, and you sort of lose sight of the big picture and actually, what's my end goal here? You're just reacting to the event. What we want you to be able to do is to pause and to respond to the event, to drive a purposeful outcome. So what is your end goal and how do you get there? It's that piece around this, your R factor decisions. Choose the actions, choose how you interact with people, whether to say something or not say something, whether to persevere or whether to give up, what direction to go in. It's taking that response. And thinking, a great question to ask is my response to this event going to take me closer or further away from my end goal? Or sort of going back to Sarah's point at the beginning, if you haven't got a goal necessarily, it depends on the event. Is my response to this event going to be in line with my values and my characteristics? And does it feel authentic for me? Or actually, am I maybe responding because I've got a fear of what somebody thinks about me? Because often that piece we talked about in the boardroom, sometimes we'll see women being really aggressive in the boardroom and overprove it. And it's because they think that there's an expectation from the men in the room that they need to be loud. But does that feel authentic to you? Because if that doesn't feel authentic to you, then don't do it. If that feels like it's different to how you are at your core, and it's not bringing you closer to your goal. If your goal is to influence authentically. So this is just a good little piece to remember. So pause, press the hypothetical pause button. We did have a client recently who gave a really great tip that she uses. She has a question that she uses that buys her time, because in a meeting or in a group of people, sometimes you feel like you don't have time to pause. Somebody can say something that triggers a fear or triggers an emotional response. So she uses a question. Her question is, can you tell me more about that? Because it's relevant in every situation. So, and she's not really interested in telling me more, but what it does is it buys her some time. So while the other person does that, it buys her a piece of time that allows her to pause, to consider if a fear that she has is triggering an emotional reaction.
Yeah.
And it allows her to think about her response versus her just reacting. And then she formulates a conscious response. So that's useful. It might be a useful tip for you to think about a question that feels authentic to you, that is useful in cross, don't think about a question that's specific to one situation. A question like, can you tell me more about, can you help me understand your thinking on that? Can you expand a little bit? All of those types of questions are useful, just pieces to give you room to pause. Really, as a wrap up to this, we want you just to think about what one thing would you like to develop further as a leader. Some of the conversation that we've had in this might have triggered some things for you. You might have some things that you are working on yourself, but we really just want you to think about, if there was one thing, what would you like to develop? Think about how you want to be seen. How do you want to be seen by your clients? How do you want to be seen by your team? How do you want to be seen personally? What does that one thing look like?
It was interesting in the webinar we've just delivered. There was a number of people, actually, there was a theme came through around wanting to be able to delegate better and not have to make all the decisions, and actually not to feel like they have to be almost the mother figure with their team, or be the one that everybody looks to for support and help, and for people to be able to be empowered. And that was a theme that came out of that last webinar, which was really interesting. There's a lot of things that a leader needs to do. Hence why there's lots of training on it. Some of this stuff will come more natural to other people than some others, but that empowerment of others is absolutely critical. And being able to allow people to be great at things and not let your fears hold you back from letting people really, really elevate and be empowered and fly. And I think that came out quite a bit in that last webinar, which was really interesting and quite typical, which has come out before in other programs we've ran.
Yeah. And with that stuff, think about what you might be doing as a leader to trigger that stuff. Because often it's easy when we're saying, the team need to feel empowered, or the team keep asking me questions. You might just be playing something in that as a leader. Like, are you afraid to really fully delegate? You delegate on the surface, but do you actually really delegate? Do you swoop in and save them versus teaching them how to do it themselves? There's lots of things as a leader that you might be doing that drives that. So really, that's it from us. If you have space for more, you have listed out some things that you'd like to work on. There's a few different ways that you can work with us. So if you go onto our website, we have some online courses. So we actually have an online women's leadership program that you can join. We have a face-to-face women's leadership program if you are local to the Northeast that we run. It's a 6-month face-to-face program with a group of other women, and we walk through some really in-depth leadership modules. But if you're not local, you can go on our website and you can actually see those 6 modules on there. We've got some shorter self-development courses on there as well. And obviously you can reach out to us. We both do one-to-one leadership coaching. So please reach out if there's anything that we can help with. If you are interested in any of the courses, you can go online and use Women's Webinar 10 as a small discount code if you want to go on and purchase any of those. But really, thank you for taking the time to spend with us today, and hopefully we get to connect with you soon.
Thanks.